Конгрес українців Канади, відділ Торонто, представляє 29-й День Незалежності України тут, на Контакті.
Продовжуємо нашу передачу, присвячену відзначенню Дня Незалежності України, привітом від президента Світового конгресу українців Павла Грода.
Шановні друзі, вельми шановні провідники Конгресу українців Канади та їх складові організації, дорога українська громада Торонто та Південного Онтаріо. Від імені Світового конгресу українців вітаю з найбільшим національним святом – Днем відновлення незалежності України. 29 років тому здійснилася мрія багатьох поколінь українців. І це не просто мрія. Це незламне прагнення українського народу до свободи. Це непохитна віра в перемогу над ворогом. Це невтомна праця задля європейського майбутнього української держави. Це духовна єдність поколінь українців в Україні та в діаспорі, що століттями виборювали незалежність. Це свято світового українського народу. Адже де б ми не жили, гордімося, що ми є українці. Перед всіма нами зараз стоять великі виклики. Подолання російської агресії проти України та українського народу по світі, розбудова могутньої України та збереження нашої ідентичності в світі. Я пишаюся тим, що українці Канади пліч-о-пліч стоять на підтримку українського суверенітету, української мови і української незалежності. З Днем Незалежності України! Слава Україні!
Кожне щорічне відзначення Дня Незалежності України проводилося під гаслом, яке нагадувало нам про історичні моменти в боротьбі українського народу за незалежність. Сьогодні в рубриці «Розмови про культуру» пропонуємо вам другу частину давнішньої розмови Тані Стех із професором Франком Сисоном про українських січових стрільців як частку традицій боротьби українців за незалежну українську державу.
And now we revisit part 2 of my interview with Professor Frank Sisson about the Ukrainian Sich Riflemen. Today he discusses various formations within the riflemen, including Jewish battalions.
Розмови про культуру, спонсоровані святом Дня Незалежності.
The Ukrainian Galician Army had a Jewish battalion that fought alongside the Ukrainians. What was the role of Jews and national minorities in general in the independence struggle?
The entire population of Galicia was perhaps 10% Jewish. In some areas of eastern Galicia and the Ukrainian regions, very high in a number of the small towns and in the city of Lviv itself. Jews were more numerous than Ukrainians or Greek Catholics, as because the Austrian census gives us religion. The Jewish population in some elite spheres had become Polonized at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. Earlier they had become Germanized, and then with the Polish control of eastern Galicia, some of the elite had become pro-Polish. The vast majority of Jews in eastern Galicia spoke Yiddish as their language, and the Jewish community, when the struggle breaks out, wanted to declare its neutrality. That is, that it would take neither side in this war. There was a pogrom when the Poles retake Lviv by the Polish troops against the Jewish population for having taken neutrality, and the Poles conscript Jews into the Polish forces. Ukrainians initially declared that they would respect the Jewish neutrality, but then as the struggle goes on, and particularly in the areas around Ternopil, there are Jewish units that have been formed for protection of Jewish population, and from them a Jewish unit of the Ukrainian Galician Army is formed. And that unit then, when the Ukrainians are pushed out of eastern Galicia, retreats with the Ukrainian Galician Army, and it shows a high level of combat readiness during the war with the Poles. There had already begun, as early as 1907, to be more close agreements for electoral concerns between the Jewish population and Ukrainian population of Galicia. to try and cooperate against the dominant Polish groups in the zone. This was a very important moment for Jewish-Ukrainian relations. Obviously, the fact that the Ukrainian state recognized Jews as a minority, that is, with a right to their own culture, and it even in eastern Ukraine initially declared that Jews, the Yiddish as a language or Hebrew, depending on their choice, would be recognized as a language of population, gives personal cultural autonomy to the Jewish population and represents an important phase in the evolution of Jewish self-identity as a national group.
There were also other siege riflemen who fought to defend Kyiv and central and eastern Ukraine. Who were they and what was their significance?
There were a large number of prisoners taken from the Austro-Hungarian forces, particularly in this period of 1914-15. They are moved into the interior of the empire closer, and many were in the regions around the city of Kyiv. As in February of 1917, the Romanov Empire first has a revolution which overthrows the Tsar, and then ultimately begins its dissolution. Ukrainians in eastern Ukraine, led by Mikhailo Hrushevsky, when he is released because of this, form the Central Rada, or the group that takes power in 1917. And by the end of 1917, beginning of 1918, that group is evolving into the Ukrainian National People's Republic. It finally declares total independence from Russia on the 22nd of January of 1918. But that also meant that as the Galician Ukrainians and Bukovinian Ukrainians who are imprisoned are leaving these prisoner camps, they then join the forces of the Ukrainian National Republic, and they form a siege unit in eastern Ukraine. That becomes some of the most important troops supporting the Ukrainian National Republic. And many of the leaders, including Evgen Konovalets, Andriy Melnik, that are associated with later Ukrainian political movements, are involved in this formation of the siege groups in eastern Ukraine. As we know, the Ukrainian movement had not been allowed to develop in the Russian Empire to the degree of the Austrian. There was a much lower level of attachment to the Ukrainian cause, I would say, among the mass of the population. Although, of course, eastern Ukraine, with its large population, its wealthy land, was able relatively quickly, and in 1917, 18, 19, massive changes were occurring in identity. But within them, the Galicians, with these traditions they had brought from the siege from before the First World War, their dedication to an independent Ukrainian state, form a very important part of the military forces of the Ukrainian National Republic.
Розмови про культуру, спонсоровані святом Дня Незалежності.
Після наступних реклам привіт прем'єра Онтаріо Даг Форд.
Конгрес українців Канади, відділ Торонто, представляє 29-й День Незалежності України тут, на Контакті.